Hello and welcome to the HR Like a Boss podcast. I'm your host, John Bernatovich. I have embarked on a journey to get to know amazingly awesome HR and business professionals with the hope to find out what it takes to do HR like a boss. If you enjoy the show, please make sure that you subscribe and hit that 5-star rating. Welcome again to another episode of the HR Like a Boss podcast. This is a really special episode for me. It's one of those, you're on a podcast and then you think to yourself, what a great host that was. What an incredible conversation. And she would be a great host. She would be a great guest on the HR Like a Boss podcast. So to the HR Like a Boss community, let's welcome into the HR Like a Boss podcast, Shari Simpson. Shari, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. And what wonderful things to say about being on the podcast. I love that.
You've been in HR for an extended period of part of your career. And I'm curious, what do you think the purpose of human resources is?
Yeah, I love this question because I think if you had asked me this question 10 years ago, I probably would have leaned more to policy, procedure, and risk management. I don't think that anymore. I think the real role of HR is a strategic planning and business alignment partner. And I think we do that through things like employee development and employee well-being, regulatory compliance and risk management, recruitment and talent management, and then organizational culture and employee relations. I think our role is really pivotal in helping organizations reach their business objectives through empowering their employees to do that. I think sometimes we think of business as, how many widgets we create or how many, cogs in the wheel we have. But the reality is businesses are driven by people, and HR is there to help leverage those people in a way that supports them in their development, but also at the end of the day, right, meets our business objectives. And we're in a really unique role to do that now, I think.
So tell me about the journey of your transformation from that. I'll just describe it. I'll just say it feels a little bit more tactical, a little bit more compliance related to far more strategic and business alignment, and maybe even broader than that. What caused you to answer that question differently today than you would have a few years back?
Yeah, I had a really great journey, and then I got to do a lot of different roles throughout my career. So I did the payroll and benefits thing. I've done, learning and development. And earlier in my career, the organizations that I worked in were very tactical HR. And once I stepped into more modern organizations that really valued their employees differently, my eyes were totally open to what HR could accomplish in an organization. I think this comes back to years ago, we talked about HR having a seat at the table, right? There was this push to be a strategic partner, to think strategically, to move that direction. And I always kind of felt like we were pushing for that. But when I think back to it now, I don't think we were bringing strategy to the table to be taken seriously, right? Less about push and how do we pull a little bit? How do we create that influence to show that the data that we are bringing, the people data that we are bringing, is so valuable for the success of the business? And so as businesses, I think, started to see that human capital was just as important as some of the other things they were talking about, my own view of HR shifted. And I started to see these amazing ways that we can connect to our employees. One of the experiences I had, I was working for a company called Peapod. They're an online grocery delivery company. This was probably back in, 2010-ish timeframe. And one of the requirements was if you were a salaried employee, you'd have to go deliver groceries for a day to get in kind of the weeds of what was happening. And that experience connected the dots for me for the work that HR does. If you can be there and you can see how the work is being done, you can create really great tactics on how to leverage and empower those employees to meet those business objectives, which is way different than being the policy police. I just think HR's got to move away from that really, really tactical policy police mindset and moved into a more modern empowerment view of the employee.
So tell us about the HR Mixtape. So you travel around at some large conferences, you put on shows. What's the frequency for it? How can people find it if they want to check it out on all the various podcast platforms? Give a quick plug for it.
Yeah, so the HR Mixtape is, think about it as coffee chat with people in the HR industry. And not just that. So I've had people like Johnny C. Taylor on, right? The CEO and president of SHRM. I've also had people on like David Sampson, the former president of the Miami Marlins baseball team, right? But it's all focused on things in HR that you're curious about or that you need to grow in, or that is related to your own professional journey. So I had somebody on talking about writing a book, right? That's something that you've had experience in, but I think everybody in HR is always writing a book in their head about the things that we've experienced. So it's really an opportunity to focus on, what are we thinking about as HR practitioners? How do we push ourselves to be more modern? And how do we learn from people who've failed and have really grown from those failures? We also do something new on this podcast, which is I will go and I'll grab questions off of Facebook or LinkedIn or Reddit, and I'll bring a guest on and we'll sort of tackle those kind of tough HR sticky questions. So that's been a lot of fun. So if you're looking to listen to the HR Mixtape, you can find it on all the podcast players, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the big ones, just like yours.
How would you describe someone that does HR like a boss?
I love this question. And I think as I was thinking through this, I probably had 20 million different ideas. But what I landed on was, I think those that really show up like HR like a boss are those that can be data-driven decision makers. And I think that because I think it's so powerful to come into a conversation with a leader, a manager, even an employee, and talk about the research you've done, the listening you've done, right? Data doesn't necessarily just mean I ran an Excel spreadsheet or an export from my HCM. It's how did you listen to what's happening around you in your environment? What are you hearing in your culture? And how do you help surface that information to your leadership to make really good decisions? So I would say HR like a boss is being a data-driven decision maker.
Shari, great job. Glad to have you on the other side of the mic. Hopefully you enjoyed your time on the HR Like a Boss podcast.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for checking out the HR Like a Boss podcast. If it resonates with you, please leave a rating and review, or better yet, subscribe and share with a friend. Until next time, let's continue to aspire to do amazingly awesome HR.